Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku Posses Angelic Quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, was a kaleidoscope of vibrant, earth-shattering wonders. It was a world of heroes who could punch the clouds and villains who could morph into monsters. It was a world where the impossible was a daily occurrence, a spectacle broadcast on every screen and reenacted on every playground. Quirk, the word was magic, a promise whispered on the wind, and all Izuku wanted was his own piece of that magic. He sat on a crinkly paper sheet covering a sterile examination chair, his legs too short to touch the ground, swinging his signature red shoes back and forth. His mother, Inko, sat beside him, her hands wrung so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The air in the doctor's office was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and unspoken anxiety. It was the same office where all his friends had been told their destinies. Tsubasa got to grow wings. Katsuki could make explosions, tiny, crackling fireworks in his palms that smelled like burned sugar. The doctor, a kindly man with a bushy mustache and glasses perched on his nose, swiveled in his chair. He held up an X-ray, the ghostly image of Izuku's foot illuminated by the light panel behind it. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," he began, his tone professionally gentle. "It's usually the pinky toe joint. In a typical case of quirklessness, a child will have 2 joints, a vestigial remnant from a time before quirks. As you can see here." He tapped the film. "Izuku only has 1. He's 4th generation. Statistically, it was almost a certainty he'd develop a quirk." Inko let out a shuddering breath of relief, a dam of worry breaking. "Oh, thank goodness. I was so worried. He's the only one in his friend group who hasn't shown any signs." Izuku vibrated with excitement. "So I'm gonna get one. I'm gonna get a quirk. Is it super strength like All Might? Or fire breath? Or, the doctor chuckled. "It's hard to say, son. Quirk manifestation is a unique journey for everyone. It could be related to yours, Mrs. Midoriya, a form of minor telekinesis, or his father's fire breathing. Sometimes it's a complete mutation. Just be patient. It will come." Patience was a virtue Izuku did not possess. The drive home was a blur of excited questions, his small mind racing through every heroic possibility. He spent the evening glued to the computer, watching the same video over and over again. All Might, his silhouette a beacon of hope against a backdrop of fire and debris, carrying a dozen people on his back. His booming laugh, his catchphrase that promised safety to all who heard it. "I am here!" Izuku turned in his chair, his eyes shining with tears of pure adoration. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to be a hero just like him. I'm going to save everyone with a smile." Inko's heart swelled. She came over and wrapped her arms around him. "I know you will, sweetie. You'll be the best hero." It was later that night, tucked into his All Might-themed bed, that the world tilted on its axis. He was dreaming of flying, of soaring through the clouds with a red cape billowing behind him, when a strange warmth began to spread from the center of his back. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was pleasant, like sinking into a warm bath or standing in a patch of perfect sunlight. It felt right. Like a missing piece of himself was finally clicking into place. He stirred, his dream-addled mind slowly surfacing to consciousness. The warmth intensified, becoming a soft, internal glow that seemed to hum just beneath his skin. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and then he saw it. His room, usually cast in the deep blues and blacks of night, was awash in a gentle, golden luminescence. It wasn't coming from the nightlight or the street lamp outside his window. It was coming from him. He looked down at his hands, turning them over. They were just his hands, small and a little chubby, but they seemed to be lit from within. A strange pressure built between his shoulder blades. It wasn't painful, but it was immense, like the feeling of a held breath that desperately needed to be released. He gasped, arching his back. From his All Might onesie, 2 lines of brilliant, impossible light tore through the fabric with a soundless rush. They unfurled, expanding into 2 magnificent, breathtaking wings. They weren't made of flesh or feather, but of pure, semi-tangible energy. They were the color of the sun at dawn, a cascade of liquid gold shot through with filaments of platinum white. They cast intricate, dancing shadows on his walls and ceiling, making his room look like the inside of a cathedral. They hummed with a silent, comforting energy, and the warmth they radiated filled the small space, chasing away the last vestiges of the night. Izuku stared, his jaw slack, his heart hammering in his chest. He tentatively reached back, his fingers hesitating before touching the surface of one wing. It felt like touching warm, solidified air. It yielded slightly to his touch, sending soft ripples of light across its surface. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just breathed. And for the first time in his life, he felt utterly and completely whole. The years that followed were a lesson in a different kind of different. Izuku Midoriya was not quirkless. He was not powerless. He was, in the eyes of many adults, blessed. The doctors and quirk counselors who studied him were awestruck. They called his quirk Seraphim, a name that felt too grand and heavy for a small boy. They catalogued its abilities: functional flight by the age of 6, a passive, luminous aura that had a demonstrably calming effect on people and animals, and a developing ability to channel his light to soothe pain and accelerate healing. He was a medical marvel. A beautiful anomaly. To the kids on the playground, however, he was just weird. What's it even do? A boy with extendable fingers asked one afternoon, poking out one of Izuku's softly glowing wings. I can fly, Izuku said proudly, hovering a few feet off the ground. Yeah, but can you fight? Another kid demanded, puffing out his chest. The question hung in the air. Izuku's wings folded slightly. Well, I can make people feel better when they're sad. And if you get a scrape, I can make it stop hurting. The children exchanged unimpressed looks. Making people feel better wasn't a hero's job. Heroes punched villains. They stopped bank robberies. They didn't hand out glowing bandages. The harshest critic, as always, was Katsuki Bakugo. When Izuku had first manifested his quirk, Bakugo had been fascinated. The raw visual power of the light was impressive. But that fascination quickly curdled into a unique brand of dismissive contempt. Their dynamic was cemented on a hot summer's day by the creek. A younger boy in their group had slipped on a mossy rock and scraped his knee badly. He was wailing, fat tears rolling down his dusty cheeks. Bakugo and his friends just stood there, telling him to stop being a baby. Izuku, however, immediately knelt beside him. It's okay, he said softly, his own aura flaring instinctively, a gentle wave of calm washing over the crying child. Let me see. He placed his hands gently over the bleeding knee. A warm, golden light pooled in his palms, and the boy's sobs hitched and quieted, his eyes wide with wonder. The stinging pain faded into a dull, warm thrum. When Izuku pulled his hands away, the bleeding had stopped completely. Bakugo scoffed, a sharp, percussive sound. See? That's all you're good for. Playing nurse. He kicked a pebble into the water. My quirk can beat up villains. Your quirk, it's like a night light. Just a pretty, useless night light. The name stuck. He was no longer Deku, the one who couldn't do anything. He was Nightlight, the one whose only purpose was to look nice and be comforting. The insult was subtler, but in many ways it cut deeper. Deku was a judgment of his potential. Nightlight was a judgment of his very nature. It implied passivity. It implied he was an object, a tool for others' comfort, not an actor in his own right. He was still an outcast, but for entirely new reasons. He wasn't bullied in the traditional sense. Few kids wanted to pick a fight with the boy who seemed to radiate a palpable sense of peace. Instead, he was isolated. He was an object of curiosity, a living art installation. No one knew how to play heroes versus villains with him. He couldn't be a villain, he was literally made of light, and he couldn't be a hero in the way they understood it. His powers weren't for fighting. They were for fixing what was broken after the fight was over. He spent his childhood on the sidelines, watching Bakugo lead their friends in explosive, mock battles, while he was the designated medic, a role he both cherished and resented. He loved helping. He hated that helping was all anyone thought he could do. His admiration for All Might, however, never wavered. It intensified. He filled notebook after notebook, but his analysis began to shift. He still marveled at the hero's strength, his incredible smashes and Texas-sized punches. But he started noticing other things. He analyzed All Might's rescue procedures, the way he calmed a panicked crowd with just his presence and a smile. He charted the efficiency of support heroes like Recovery Girl and the Lurkers. He studied how heroes mitigated collateral damage, how they evacuated civilians, how they performed triage in disaster zones. His dream wasn't broken, it had just been forced to find a different path. If he couldn't be the sword that struck down evil, he would be the ultimate shield. He would be the hero who arrived after the villain was beaten, the one who healed the wounded, comforted the terrified, and literally brought light back to the darkness. It was a noble goal, a heroic goal, but late at night, in the quiet of his room, a cold knot of inadequacy would tighten in his stomach. He would watch videos of All Might wrestling a monster to the ground and feel a chasm open between them. All Might was a symbol of victory. How could Izuku ever be that, when his quirk wasn't made for winning fights? The final bell of Aldera Junior High shrieked through the halls, signaling the end of the day and, for many, the end of an entire chapter of their lives. The classroom buzzed with the nervous energy of teenagers on the cusp of their future. Now, as you're all third years, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures, the teacher said, a stack of career pamphlets in his hand. He tossed them into the air with a flourish. But who am I kidding? I know you all want to go to the hero course, the class erupted. Quirks flared in a chaotic display of adolescent ambition. One boy stretched his eyeballs, another turned his fingers to stone. Izuku sank lower in his seat, trying to become invisible. He wanted it more than any of them, a fierce, burning ache in his chest, but he hated the attention. Yes, you've all got some impressive quirks, the teacher droned on. But no quirk usage in school. Hey, teach! A familiar, arrogant voice cut through the noise. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair, feet propped on his desk, a lazy, confident smirk on his face. Don't lump me in with these losers. I'm the real deal. The rest of these rejects will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. The class erupted again, this time in outrage. Get over yourself, Bakugo. I aced the mock test. Bakugo shot back, pointing a thumb at his chest. I'm the only one at this garbage school who stands a chance of getting into UA. I'll surpass All Might himself and become the #1 hero, not to mention the richest, the top hero program in the country. The acceptance rate is less than 1%, Izuku thought, his hand tightening on his pen. It was his first, last, and only choice. The teacher shuffled through his papers. Oh, that's right. Midoriya, you're aiming for UA too, aren't you? The classroom went dead silent. Every eye swiveled to Izuku. For a moment, there was only the sound of a fly buzzing near the window. Then, the laughter started. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was bewildered, incredulous laughter. Midoriya? No way, you need a combat quirk to get into the hero course. I mean, his quirk is pretty, one of the girls whispered. But what's he going to do, soothe the villains into submission? Izuku's face burned hot with shame. He wanted to retract his wings into his back, to hide the faint, glowing marks on his uniform, to disappear entirely. Bakugo slowly turned his head, his red eyes narrowed into slits. The air around him seemed to crackle. He didn't yell. He spoke in a low, dangerous growl. Nightlight. Izuku flinched. You've got to be kidding me. Bakugo seethed, slamming his hand on Izuku's desk with a sharp boom of a contained explosion. Smoke curled from his palm. You think they're gonna let a glorified lamp into the greatest hero school in the world? You don't have a single fighting bone in your body. You'd be a liability. You'd get someone killed. Izuku pushed his chair back, his heart pounding. That's not true, Kaken. They got rid of that rule. I could be a rescue hero. I can save people. You can't save anyone if you can't even protect yourself. Bakugo snarled, grabbing the front of Izuku's uniform. UA is for winners. It's for people who know how to fight. What are you going to do when a villain is about to kill someone? Shine on them? Heal them after they're already dead? Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, striking right at the heart of Izuku's deepest fears. He had no response. He just looked down, his fists clenched, his own light feeling dim and useless. The teacher finally intervened, and Bakugo let him go with a final shove. The rest of the day passed in a miserable haze. As Izuku was packing his bag, eager to escape, a familiar hand snatched one of his notebooks from his desk. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. "We're not done here," Bakugo said, his voice deceptively calm. His two cronies flanked him. "Still doing this, huh?" One of them sneered, peering at the detailed drawings and notes. Bakugo held the notebook between two fingers as if it were something dirty. "It's one thing to be a hero fanboy. It's another to be this delusional." He casually placed the notebook between his palms. Crackle. Sizzle. Boom. A small, sharp explosion turned the cover to ash and scorched the pages within. Izuku let out a horrified gasp. "No!" Bakugo tossed the smoking wreck out the open window. It landed in the koi pond below with a soft splash. "The best heroes, they showed signs of greatness even as students," Bakugo said, his voice a low hiss as he placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the heat from his quirk radiating through the fabric. "I'm going to be the first and only hero from this crappy school. A little bit of friendly advice, don't even think about applying to UA. You just embarrass yourself." He walked away, his cronies trailing behind him. Izuku stood there, frozen, the smell of burnt paper and Bakugo's nitroglycerin sweat filling his nostrils. The faint, warm glow of his own passive aura felt like a mockery. What good was a calming presence when he was the one who felt like he was falling apart? He retrieved his soggy, ruined notebook from the pond, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The ink was bleeding across the pages, blurring the meticulous notes he had spent hours compiling. "It's what he said," a venomous voice whispered in his mind. "What good are you? You can't stop him. You can't stop anyone." He walked home under the oppressive gray concrete of an underpass, the notebook clutched in his hand. He was trying to rally his spirits, to remember All Might's words about never giving up, when a grotesque gurgling sound echoed from behind him. He turned, and his blood ran cold. A monstrous, churning mass of green sludge was pouring out of a manhole cover. It had two huge, manic eyes and a gaping mouth filled with yellowing teeth. It smelled like a sewer. "A medium-sized vessel," the villain rasped, its voice wet and viscous. "You'll do nicely." Before Izuku could even scream, the sludge monster lunged. It was on him in an instant, a suffocating, putrid wave. Sludge forced its way into his mouth and nose, a vile, choking tide. He clawed at the semi-liquid body, but his fingers just passed through it. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He couldn't breathe. His vision started to tunnel, the edges turning black. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die right here." In a desperate, final act of self-preservation, his quirk flared. His wings of light erupted from his back, not with their usual gentle grace, but with a violent, panicked burst of energy. The intense light and heat made the sludge recoil with a hiss of pain. It wasn't a real attack, but it bought him a precious second of air. He coughed, gagging on the filth. "A light quirk, eh? Flashy," the villain snarled, momentarily thrown off. "But it's no use." Suddenly, the manhole cover shot into the air like a cannonball. "Have no fear, you are safe," a voice boomed, a voice that Izuku knew better than his own. "Now that I am here," All Might, in all his glory, stood framed in the tunnel's entrance. The sheer force of his presence was staggering. "Texas Smash!" He threw a punch, and the world became wind. The air pressure alone was like a physical blow, scattering the sludge villain into 1,000 splattering droplets. Izuku collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, his lungs burning. The last thing he saw before he passed out was the triumphant, smiling face of his idol. When he came to, he was being gently patted on the cheek by a massive hand. He blinked, and the towering, muscular form of All Might swam into focus. "Ah, thought we lost you there," the hero boomed. He was already scooping the splattered remains of the villain into a pair of soda bottles. "Well done, citizen! You held on admirably." Izuku scrambled to his feet, his mind a frantic, star-struck mess. "All Might! It's really you. See, can I have your autograph? I have my notebook. Oh, wait, it's all wet." He fumbled for the soggy book. He opened it to a clean page and saw that All Might had already signed it. He already did it! Izuku bowed frantically, over and over. Thank you so much! This will be a family heirloom, of course! All Might laughed, giving him a thumbs up. He pocketed the soda bottles. Well, I must be off. The forces of justice are always on the clock. He crouched, preparing for a mighty leap. Wait. No. This was his one chance. His only chance. The words of Bakugo, of his classmates, of his own self-doubt echoed in his head. He had to know. Wait! Izuku cried out, and in a moment of pure, unthinking desperation, he grabbed onto All Might's leg just as the hero launched himself into the sky. The flight was terrifying and exhilarating. The wind ripped at him, but he held on for dear life. Hey! Let go! I love my fans, but this is too much! All Might yelled over the roar of the wind. If I let go, I'll die! Izuku screamed back. All Might, realizing the boy was right, quickly looked for a place to land. He touched down on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku's legs felt like jelly as he let go, his entire body trembling. He was about to be scolded, he knew it. He deserved it. But as All Might turned to speak, he suddenly coughed, a racking, painful sound. And then, in a shocking plume of steam, the muscular hero deflated. Where the symbol of peace had stood, there was now a skeletal man with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Izuku stared, his brain refusing to process what he was seeing. You're not All Might! You're an imposter! A fake, the man sighed, wiping the blood with the back of his hand. I assure you, I am All Might. He sat down heavily on the rooftop floor. He lifted his shirt, revealing a horrific, swirling scar that covered the entire left side of his torso. It looked like a starburst of ruined flesh. Got this in a fight about 5 years back. Pretty nasty, right? I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. The rest of the time, I'm this. Izuku could only stare, horrified. The symbol of strength, of invincibility, was broken. You have to keep this a secret. The man, Toshinori Yagi, said, his voice weary. The symbol of peace, the guy who is never afraid, can't be seen in a state like this. There is fear behind my smile. I smiled to hide it. The confession was so raw, so vulnerable, that it snapped Izuku out of his shock. It made his own question feel small and selfish, but he had to ask. It was the question that had defined his entire life. He took a deep breath. Even with a quirk that isn't made for fighting, can I still be a hero? Can someone with a gentle, non-combative quirk ever hope to be a symbol of victory like you? His own wings of light unfurled subconsciously, a nervous gesture. They were dim in the afternoon sun, almost translucent, but their hopeful, golden glow was unmistakable. He wasn't asking if a quirkless boy could be a hero. He was asking if a healer, a protector, could ever stand on the same stage as the ultimate fighter. Toshinori looked at the boy, truly looked at him. He saw the light wings, the earnest, tear-filled eyes, the desperate hope etched on his face. He remembered the reports of this boy, the one with the angelic quirk. The boy who was a living beacon of calm. He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of realism. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives, he said, his tone flat and tired. Some villains can't be beaten without a show of force. You have a wonderful quirk, kid. You could be an incredible doctor, a rescue worker, a counselor. You could save lives in 100 different ways. But to stand on the front lines, to be a hero in the way I think you mean, you need to be able to fight. It's not a line of work I would recommend for someone who can't. The words were a physical blow. Izuku's wings drooped, the light within them flickering like a dying candle. He felt a cold, hollowing despair wash over him. It was what he had always known, always feared. He had spent his life trying to believe otherwise, but hearing it from his idol, from the man himself, shattered the last of his delusions. I see, Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. He bowed his head, trying to hide the tears that were now streaming down his face. Thank you for your time. He turned and walked toward the rooftop door, his movements stiff and robotic. His dream was dead. As he walked, a sudden, massive explosion rocked the city block a few streets over. Black smoke billowed into the sky. A villain? Tashinori muttered, clutching his side as a sharp pain lanced through him. Damn it, I'm out of time. Izuku barely registered it. He just kept walking, his world narrowed to the crushing weight of his own failure. He made his way down the stairs and out onto the street, joining the crowd that was gathering near the site of the explosion. He moved through them like a ghost, his own inner light all but extinguished. And then he saw it. It was the sludge villain. The bottles must have fallen from All Might's pocket during their chaotic flight. And it had found a new hostage. A new vessel. A boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair and a familiar, furious snarl on his face. Kaken. Bakugo was fighting, thrashing, setting off massive explosions within the villain's body. But it was no use. The sludge was smothering him, suffocating him. His explosions were only serving to set the surrounding alleyway on fire. The heroes on the scene were struggling. Death Arms couldn't get a solid grip. Kamui Woods was useless against the fires. Wrong quirk for the job, one of them said. We have to wait for someone with a more suitable quirk to arrive, another yelled. Izuku stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, his heart a block of ice in his chest. He heard their words, the same excuses, the same logic that had just been used to crush his own dream. You can't help. You don't have the right power. All Might was there too, in his skeletal form, hiding in the crowd, clutching his side and cursing his own powerlessness. No one was moving. Everyone was waiting for a hero. And then, Izuku saw Bakugo's eyes. Through the swirling green sludge, for one fleeting second, their eyes met. And in that gaze, Izuku didn't see the arrogant bully, the confident rival. He saw a terrified child. He saw desperation. He saw a plea for help. Before his brain could process it, before his legs could protest, he was running. He burst through the police cordon, a blur of green and black. The heroes yelled at him to stop, but he didn't hear them. All he could hear was the frantic, desperate drumbeat of his own heart. What am I doing? I can't fight him. I don't have a plan. His mind, a finely honed machine of hero analysis, kicked into overdrive, processing the scene in a fraction of a second. Villain is fluid, blunt force is ineffective. Bakugo is suffocating. Need to create space, get him air. Eyes are solid points. Weak spot. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a punch. He had his school bag. He swung it off his shoulder and hurled it with all his might. A stray textbook flew out and struck the villain directly in the eye. The monster roared in pain, its grip loosening for a microsecond. It was all Izuku needed. He didn't try to punch. He didn't try to hurt the villain. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He tried to save someone. He lunged forward, his hands clawing at the thick sludge surrounding Bakugo's face. Kaken! He screamed. What the hell are you doing here, Nightlight? Bakugo choked out, his voice hoarse. I don't know. Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. My legs, they just started moving. You looked like you were asking for help. That single, honest, selfless confession struck a chord deep within Tashinori Yagi. He watched, his emaciated form trembling, as this boy, this quirk inadequate, dream-crushed boy, did what none of the pros on the scene were doing. He was acting. The sludge villain recovered its senses, fury contorting its grotesque face. You again! I'm going to kill you both! It raised a massive tendril of sludge to strike Izuku down. Izuku saw it coming. There was no time to dodge. There was no time to run. All his inadequacies, all his fears, all of Bakugo's insults, and All Might's crushing realism told him this was the end. He was going to die a failure. But he was not a failure. He was a protector. In a final, desperate act, he turned his back to the blow and threw his entire being into his quirk. His wings didn't just appear. They detonated from his back in a silent, blinding supernova of golden light. He wrapped them around Bakugo, creating a solid, shimmering dome of energy around them both. It was not an attack. It was a shield. A sanctuary. The sludge tendrils slammed into the luminous barrier. It didn't shatter. It held. The foul ooze sizzled and recoiled from the pure, concentrated light. Inside the dome, the air was clean and warm. Bakugo coughed, taking his first real breath in minutes, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the golden cage his former victim had created for him. From the crowd, All Might watched the scene unfold. He saw the boy, who had been told he couldn't be a hero, shielding his tormentor with his own body, using a useless quirk in the most heroic way imaginable. He wasn't trying to win. He was refusing to let someone else lose. A fire ignited in Tashinori's soul. You practice what you preach, you idiot, he berated himself. He forced his broken body to move, the steam of transformation already beginning to hiss from his skin. There is a story that all heroes share. His voice, weak at first but growing in power, narrated in his mind. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. The crowd gasped as the skeletal man began to bulk up, muscle and power returning to his frame. Inside the shield, Izuku felt his strength failing. The light of his wings was flickering, the dome cracking under the villain's furious assault. He was exhausted, terrified, but he held on. Just as the shield was about to shatter, a massive hand gripped his shoulder. I really am pathetic, All Might said, his voice now a full, resonant boom. He stood between the boys and the villain, his back to them, a living wall of hope. I told you the qualities of a hero, but I see I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. He grabbed Bakugo's arm, anchoring himself. Detroit Smash! His punch was a force of nature. It obliterated the sludge villain and changed the weather, the sheer force of the blow creating an updraft that caused rain to fall from a clear blue sky. The battle was over. In the aftermath, Izuku was ferociously scolded by the pro-heroes for his recklessness, while Bakugo was praised for his bravery. Izuku tuned it all out, his mind numb. He just wanted to go home. As he walked away, Bakugo stopped him. Hey! I never asked for you to save me. I could have handled it myself. So don't think you can look down on me. Got it, you useless nightlight? He turned and stomped away, his pride clearly wounded beyond measure. Izuku watched him go, a sad, tired smile on his face. He started the lonely walk home, his dreams still feeling like a distant, impossible star. I am here! Izuku yelped as All Might, in his full heroic form, zipped around the corner, coming to a dramatic halt in front of him. All Might? What are you doing here? Weren't you just mobbed by reporters? Getting away from them was a piece of cake. For I am All M. He suddenly deflated in another plume of steam, collapsing into his skeletal form and spitting blood. Young man, he said, his tone serious, I came here to thank you. And to apologize. And to make a proposal. Izuku stared, utterly bewildered. If you hadn't been there, Tashinori continued. If I hadn't heard your story and seen you run into that danger, I would have just been a bystander, another fake hero in the crowd. So thank you? No, it was my fault to begin with. Izuku stammered. I got in your way and made you drop the villain. That's not it, Tashinori said, cutting him off. He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes filled with a new, burning intensity. Of all the heroes on that scene, you were the only one who acted. You, the boy without a combat quirk, who had been told he couldn't make it. You were the most heroic person there today. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, his throat tightening. Young man, All Might said, his voice ringing with a conviction that shook Izuku to his core. You, too, can become a hero. Izuku collapsed to his knees, sobbing. It was the sentence he had waited his entire life to hear. Through his tears, he looked up at the number one hero, his vision blurred. All Might smiled, a real, genuine smile, not the one he wore for the cameras. You possess a truly remarkable quirk. It inspires hope. It protects. It heals. It is the heart of a true hero. I have deemed you worthy of inheriting my power. Izuku's sobbing stopped. He stared, his mind blank. Inherit your power? My quirk, Tashinori explained, is not what the world thinks it is. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is a stockpile of immense power, a quirk called One for All. He stood tall, a silhouette against the setting sun, his form frail but his spirit indomitable. I have been searching for a successor. And I have found him. Young man, your journey, your spirit, your selfless act today. It all proves it. I want you to be the next wielder of One for All. Izuku looked down at his own hands, at the faint golden light that still clung to his skin. Then he looked at the greatest hero in the world offering him a legacy beyond his wildest dreams. His quirk was a shield. All Might was offering him a sword. And in that moment, a new path forward, brighter and more terrifying than any he had ever imagined, opened up before him. The world, which had just recently snapped back into sharp, terrifying focus, dissolved once more. Izuku Midoriya was on his knees on a cracked pavement sidewalk, the dampness seeping through his uniform trousers, and the setting sun was casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to claw at the edges of his vision. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of an evening train, the murmur of passers-by, were a muffled drone, a symphony played underwater. All he could hear was the frantic, impossibly loud drumming of his own heart, and the echo of the words that had just rewritten his reality. You, too, can become a hero. The sentence he had chased his entire life, the validation he had yearned for with every fiber of his being, had been delivered. He should have been ecstatic. He should have been levitating with joy, his own light flaring bright enough to outshine the street lamps that were beginning to flicker to life. Instead, a new, more profound shock had paralyzed him, rooting him to the spot. I have deemed you worthy of inheriting my power. He stared up at the skeletal figure of the man who was, and somehow was not, All Might. The hero's sunken eyes held a gravity that felt ancient, a weight of ages that Izuku couldn't begin to comprehend. Inherit your quirk? Izuku whispered, the words feeling alien and clumsy in his mouth. But that's not possible. Quirks aren't. You can't just give them to someone. They're biological. They're part of your DNA. Everyone knows that. It was one of the fundamental truths of their world, as certain as gravity, or the rising of the sun. To suggest otherwise was like suggesting a person could simply hand over the color of their eyes. Tashinori Yagi let out a weary sigh, a small cloud of condensation in the cooling air. The world knows what I want it to know, young man. My quirk is a unique and well-guarded secret. He offered a hand to Izuku, his grip surprisingly firm and steady despite his emaciated appearance. Come. This is not a conversation for a public street corner. Izuku took the hand, his own trembling, and allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. His legs felt unsteady, as if they belonged to someone else. He felt a phantom warmth on his back where his wings had manifested, a low-level hum of energy that was always present but now felt charged with a nervous, uncertain current. Tashinori led them away from the main thoroughfare, down a quieter side street and into a small, immaculately clean park. The last vestiges of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The day was ending, and Izuku felt as though his entire world, the one he had known for 15 years, was ending with it. They sat on a simple wooden bench overlooking a small, placid pond. The name of my quirk, Tashinori began, his voice low and serious, is One for All. Izuku listened, his mind struggling to keep up, to absorb the sheer impossibility of it all. Picture a sacred torch, the hero explained, his gaze fixed on the darkening water. A flame that is passed from one person to another, growing in strength with each new bearer. The first wielder had a simple quirk, the ability to pass his quirk on to others. He also had a brother, a man of immense evil, who could steal quirks and grant them to others. This brother forced a power stockpiling quirk upon him, believing him to be quirkless. Izuku's eyes widened. A quirk that could steal quirks. The idea was monstrous, but the younger brother did have a quirk. Tashinori continued, a grim set to his jaw. And the two powers merged. They became one, the ability to stockpile raw power, and the ability to pass that power, that entire singularity, on to someone else. That is One for All. I am the 8th wielder of this power, and for years I have been searching for the 9th. He turned to face Izuku fully, the fading light catching the sharp angles of his face. One for All is the antithesis of the quirk that can steal. It is a power nurtured by the will of many, a crystallization of courage and the cry for salvation. It cannot be taken by force. It must be willingly accepted. Izuku's head was spinning. A secret war, a legacy of power passed down through generations, a battle against an ultimate evil. It was the stuff of comic books, of epic legends. It wasn't something that happened to a boy from Yuzurifu whose greatest ambition, until an hour ago, was just to be allowed to try. He finally found his voice, a small, wavering thing. But why me? All Might, you saw me today. I didn't do anything. I didn't have a plan, I didn't have any power to stop him. I just ran. I was terrified. He gestured weakly to his own chest. My quirk. Seraphim, it's not a hero's quirk. Not really. The old insecurity, the one that had been his constant companion since childhood, came rushing back with a vengeance. Kaken. Bakugo, he was right. He calls me Nightlight. He says I'm a glorified lamp, that all I can do is look pretty and patch people up after the real fight is over. The confession tumbled out of him, raw and painful. And I think he's right. My light, it can soothe people, it can heal a cut or a broken bone, it can make a shield, but it can't stop a villain. It can't topple a monster. It's a gentle power in a world that needs strength. He looked at his idol, his eyes pleading for understanding. This was the heart of his conflict, the question he'd really wanted to ask on that rooftop. How can someone like me, someone with a power meant for peace, ever be a true symbol of victory? How can I save people if I can't win the fights that put them in danger in the first place? Toshinori listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When Izuku finally fell silent, his shoulders slumped in a familiar posture of defeat, the hero didn't immediately refute his words. Instead, he seemed to consider them carefully. You are wrong about your quirk, young Midoriya, he said at last, his voice soft but firm. Profoundly wrong. Izuku looked up, startled. Today, on that street, I saw a crowd of people and a dozen pro-heroes frozen in place, Toshinori said, leaning forward, his intensity making Izuku sit up straighter. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. They were paralyzed by procedure and fear. And then I saw you. You ran in. Why? I don't know, Izuku stammered. My legs your heart moved them, Toshinori finished for him. And when that villain was about to strike you down, what did you do? You didn't try to form a weapon. You didn't try a desperate, futile attack. You shielded him. You shielded your own bully, the one who belittles you and your quirk, with your own body. He pointed a long, bony finger at Izuku's chest. Your quirk is not gentle, young man. It is a physical manifestation of your spirit. Your light doesn't just heal wounds, it inspires hope. That calming aura of yours? In a disaster zone, with hundreds of panicked civilians, that is not a passive ability, it is a form of crowd control more effective than any barrier. Your shield held against a powerful blow. Your flight gives you unparalleled mobility for rescue. You see your quirk as a limitation. I see it as the most perfect foundation a hero could ever ask for. He paused, letting his words sink in. The golden glow from the markings on Izuku's back seemed to brighten slightly, pulsing in time with his rapidly beating heart. Most aspiring heroes, Toshinori said, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper, spend their entire careers trying to forge a spirit as selfless and protective as yours. They train to be brave, they learn to be compassionate. They struggle to become a symbol that people can rely on. You, young Midoriya, you were born with it. Your heart, your very quirk, they are already the most unbreakable shield I have ever seen. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of validation, of a deep, profound gratitude that left him speechless. But a shield on its own, Toshinori's voice turned grim, cannot always win the war. It can protect, but it cannot always vanquish the threat. I have seen evils in this world that cannot be soothed, that cannot be blocked. Evils that must be met with overwhelming force, that must be struck down so they cannot harm another soul. He met Izuku's gaze, and the full, world-shaking weight of his offer finally became clear. That is what I am offering you. A sword. A power forged for victory, to be wielded by a hand that knows only how to protect. I am offering you the strength to guarantee the safety of everything your shield defends. I am offering you one for all. The metaphor was perfect. It was devastating. It clicked into place in Izuku's mind with the force of a physical blow. A shield and a sword. His own innate nature, and the power of his idol. Not a replacement, but a union. The idea was so immense, so breathtakingly audacious, that it stole the air from his lungs. For a moment, he was filled with an exhilarating, soaring hope. He could do it. He could be that hero. He could be the one who not only healed the wounded but also stopped them from getting hurt in the first place. He could be a symbol of both peace and victory. But then, the crushing weight of reality returned. "But 2 quirks?" he whispered, the thought feeling like a transgression. "Is that fair? There are people all over the world with weak quirks, or quirks that are seen as villainous. There are people like I thought I was, who are quirkless. For one person to have 2, especially one as beautiful as Seraphim, and one as powerful as yours, it feels wrong. It feels greedy." It was a purely Izuku Midoriya concern, born from a lifetime of empathy and a deep-seated awareness of his own perceived place in the world. He had spent so long feeling like he had less than others. The idea of suddenly having more felt like a crime. Toshinori's expression softened. "It is not about fairness, my boy. It is about necessity. The man who gave me this quirk, my predecessor, she knew that. The world needs a symbol. It needs a pillar to stand against the darkness. And that pillar is weakening." He gestured to his own frail form. "One for all is not a prize to be won. It is a burden to be shouldered. It is the collective hope of generations, and the responsibility that comes with it is heavier than any mountain." He looked away, towards the rising moon. "And the evil my master fought, the one my quirk was created to oppose, is not gone. The world is safer than it has ever been because I am here, but that peace is fragile. It rests on a lie, the lie that I am invincible. When that lie is exposed, the world will need a new symbol, one ready to take my place. This is not about what is fair for you. It is about what is necessary for everyone else." The hero's words painted a grim picture, one of a world held in a precarious balance. Izuku began to understand. This wasn't a gift. It was a draft notice for a secret, sacred war. Still, the doubt lingered. The voice of Bakugo, the laughter of his classmates, the years of being the useless night light, they were a powerful chorus in his mind. "But am I worthy of that burden?" Izuku asked, his voice barely audible. "You're All Might. You're a legend. I'm nobody. I'm just Izuku Midoriya. I'm clumsy, I cry all the time, I get scared. Today you were scared and you still ran in." Toshinori countered immediately. "Today, you were just Izuku Midoriya, and you were more of a hero than anyone else on that street. Stop comparing yourself to who I am now. I was not born a legend. This power was passed to me as well. My master saw potential in me, just as I see it in you. Worthiness is not about the absence of fear or weakness, my boy. It is about what you do in spite of them." He stood up, his tall, skeletal frame a stark silhouette against the twilight sky. "The decision is yours, of course. I will not force this upon you. But I believe your heart is the perfect vessel. I believe that your light, combined with this power, can create a hero the likes of which the world has never seen." Izuku sat on the bench, his mind a maelstrom of conflict. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to run. This was too big, too dangerous. It was a legacy of pain and battle, ending in a horrific injury just like the one All Might carried. But every ounce of his heroic spirit, the core of his very being that had sent him running toward the sludge villain, vibrated with a different answer. He thought of the people All Might saved in his debut video, their faces filled with relief and hope. He thought of the little boy whose scraped knee he had healed by the creek, the look of wonder in his eyes. He thought of Bakugo, trapped and terrified, gasping for air. He had saved him, for a moment, with his shield. But it had been All Might's sword that had won the day. His shield had been cracking. It hadn't been enough. It would never be enough on its own, to truly save everyone with a smile, to stand before a terrified crowd and declare with absolute certainty, "I am here," and have it mean that the danger was well and truly over. He needed more. His light could mend the broken, but he needed the power to break the things that did the hurting. He needed the sword. He slowly rose to his feet, his trembling finally subsiding, replaced by a nascent, steely resolve. He looked at the greatest hero in the world, not as a fanboy looking at an idol, but as a potential apprentice looking at his master. "I'll do it." The words were quiet, but they resonated in the stillness of the park with the force of an oath. I don't know if I'm worthy, Izuku continued, his voice growing stronger, clearer. And I'm still scared. But if this power can help me save people who are in trouble, if it means I'll never have to stand by and watch someone suffer because I'm not strong enough, then I'll accept it. I will accept your power, All Might. I will carry this burden. A wide, genuine smile spread across Toshinori Yagi's face, transforming his gaunt features. It was a smile of relief, of hope, of profound pride. An excellent answer, he said. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Your journey begins now, young Midoriya. And it will be the hardest thing you have ever done. The walk home was surreal. The world that had felt distant and muffled now seemed hyper-vivid. The neon signs of storefronts burned with an impossible intensity. The chatter of people on the street was a cacophony of stories and lives that he had just sworn to protect. The weight of his school bag felt insignificant compared to the invisible mantle that had just been settled upon his shoulders. He and All Might had exchanged numbers and set a time and place to meet for the first time the next morning. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, 5 a.m. sharp. The hero had explained the plan. The first, most crucial step was to forge Izuku's body into a worthy vessel. One for All was a raging inferno of stockpiled energy. If an unprepared body tried to use it, they would explode. Their limbs would fly off. The image was so gruesome that Izuku felt bow rise in his throat. Your body needs to be strong, Toshinori had explained. But more than that, your two quirks will need to learn to coexist. Your seraphim is a quirk of pure, radiant energy. One for All is a quirk of raw, kinetic energy. Shoving them into one body will be volatile. Your training will be twofold, strengthening your body to handle the sword, and strengthening your shield so that it doesn't shatter when you draw your new weapon. Izuku finally reached his apartment building, the familiar sight of it somehow alien. He was the same boy who had left for school that morning, but he was also fundamentally, irrevocably different. He opened the door to the smell of katsudan and the sound of his mother's worried footsteps. Izuku! Where have you been? Inko Midoriya rushed to him, her face etched with concern. I saw the news about the villain attack near your school. I was so worried. Are you alright? She fussed over him, checking for injuries, her small hands fluttering around him like nervous birds. I'm fine, Mom, really, he said, forcing a smile that felt thin and unconvincing even to himself. I just got held up. The police were questioning everyone. It was a flimsy lie, but it was the best he could come up with. The truth was an impossible, dangerous secret. This was the first price of the burden, the wall that now stood between him and the person he was closest to in the world. She seemed to accept it, her relief overriding her suspicion. Oh, thank goodness. Well, wash up. I made your favorite, katsudan, to celebrate you applying to UA. His heart twisted with a pang of guilt. That morning, UA had felt like a foolish, impossible dream. Now, it felt like the first step on a path laid out for him by destiny itself. Later that night, after dinner and a long, hot shower, Izuku stood in the center of his room. It was a shrine to All Might, a monument to the dream of his childhood. Posters covered every wall, figurines stood in heroic poses on every shelf. He looked at the familiar, grinning face of his idol, but for the first time, he didn't just see a hero. He saw Toshinori Yagi. He saw the skeletal man on the rooftop, the horrific scar, the weary eyes that held the weight of the world. He saw the master who had chosen him, the predecessor whose legacy he was now bound to inherit. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and focused. He reached for the warmth in his back, the familiar, innate power that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. With a silent, graceful rush, his wings of light unfurled, filling the small room with their soft, golden radiance. The light danced across the faces of his all-might figures, casting them in a divine, angelic glow. He had always seen his wings as a separate, strange part of himself, a blessing, a curse, a thing that made him different. But now, Toshinori's words echoed in his mind. It is a physical manifestation of your spirit. He raised a hand, looking at his own palm, bathed in the light from his wings. This was his shield. This was his hope, his compassion, his unwavering drive to protect. It was gentle, yes, but it was also unyielding. It was the best part of him. Then, he slowly curled the fingers of his other hand into a tight fist. He held it up, imagining it. He pictured it crackling with red, bioelectric energy, brimming with the power of 8 generations of heroes, a force capable of changing the weather with a single punch. This was the sword. The power, the victory, the unassailable strength he had always lacked. For a long moment, he simply stood there, bathed in the gentle glow of his own quirk, holding a fist that represented a power beyond comprehension. The shield and the sword. Hope and strength. Izuku Midoriya and one for all. The weight of his new wings suddenly felt heavier, not with doubt, but with purpose. The road ahead would be grueling, painful, and fraught with dangers he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel inadequate. He felt ready. He was no longer just a boy with a gentle quirk, dreaming an impossible dream. He was the chosen heir to the greatest power on earth, and his journey to becoming a hero, a new kind of hero, was just beginning. The first rays of dawn were a pale, watercolor wash of gray and pink across the eastern sky when Izuku arrived at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The air was cool and crisp with the salt of the sea, a stark contrast to the nervous, buzzing warmth under his skin. He had barely slept, his mind a whirlwind of impossible realities and daunting futures. He was going to inherit the power of the number one hero. It still sounded like a line from a dream he hadn't yet woken up from. The beach was a travesty. It wasn't a beach so much as a landfill that had been swallowed by the ocean and then regurgitated onto the shore. Mounds of illegally dumped trash, rusting washing machines, tangled skeins of rebar, mountains of plastic bags, and even the skeletal remains of cars, rose from the sand like grotesque monuments to civic neglect. Ocean currents had conspired to make this particular cove the dumping ground for the entire coastline. A familiar skeletal figure was standing atop the highest peak of garbage, a lonely silhouette against the nascent sunrise. "All Might?" Izuku called out, his voice small against the vastness of the junk-strewn landscape and the rhythmic sigh of the waves. "Right on time, my boy!" Toshinori's voice boomed, though he remained in his emaciated form. He gestured expansively at the junkyard around them. "Behold! A testament to years of illegal dumping, a true blight upon this beautiful coastline." Izuku looked around, confused. "This is where we're training?" He had imagined a high-tech gym, a private training ground, something worthy of All Might. Not a garbage dump. "Indeed!" Toshinori hopped down from his perch with a surprising agility, landing softly on the sand. "Modern-day hero work is all about public service and showmanship. And what's more heroic than a little community service? You, my boy, are going to clean this entire section of the beach." Izuku stared at him, then at the seemingly endless piles of trash. "All of it?" he squeaked. "But why? I thought I was training to inherit one for all." "This is your training," Toshinori said, his tone shifting from cheerful to serious. He walked over to a rusted, defunct refrigerator and gave it a light tap with his foot. The heavy appliance didn't budge. "Your body is, let's be charitable and call it unprepared. One for all is a hurricane of raw power. If I poured that into you now, your limbs would pop right off." The gruesome image sent a shiver down Izuku's spine for the second time. "This Herculean task will force you to strengthen every muscle in your body," Toshinori explained, beginning to pace. "We have 10 months until the UA entrance exam. That is our deadline. By moving all this trash, you will build the foundation necessary to withstand the recoil of my quirk. This isn't just about getting strong, it's about building a vessel that won't shatter." He produced a sheaf of papers from his pocket, a meticulously detailed schedule that looked more like an engineering blueprint than a workout plan. "I call it my aim to pass, American Dream Plan. It details every aspect of your life for the next 10 months, from your workout regimen and diet to how many hours of sleep you get. It will be grueling. It will be hell, but if you follow it to the letter you will be ready." Izuku took the papers, his eyes wide as he scanned the demanding schedule. It was insane. There was hardly a moment of rest, but amidst the fear and the sheer exhaustion he felt just looking at it, a spark of fierce determination ignited within him. This was it. This was the path. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm. I'll do everything you say, All Might. A proud smile touched Tashinori's lips. That's the spirit. But remember, this is only half of your training. His gaze flickered to Izuku's back. While you build your body, we must also refine your soul, or, more accurately, the quirk that is its extension. Let's see them, my boy. Izuku nodded, took a deep breath, and focused. The familiar warmth bloomed between his shoulder blades, and his wings of light unfurled, casting a brilliant, golden glow that momentarily outshone the rising sun. In the grimy, shadowed junkyard, their pure radiance was almost shockingly beautiful, magnificent. Tashinori breathed, his eyes wide with genuine awe. Truly a sight to behold. Now, the second part of your training will be to push the limits of this power. One for all is volatile. Your Seraphim quirk, with its innate calming and healing properties, may be the only thing that can act as a buffer between you and the raw, self-destructive power of OFA. It needs to be as strong as your body. Your shield must be as mighty as the sword it will one day have to contain. And so, the 10 months of hell began. The days blurred into a grueling, monotonous cycle of pain and progress. Before the sun rose, Izuku was at the beach. He would start with quirk training. Under Tashinori's guidance, he pushed Seraphim to its absolute limits. Flight endurance was the first challenge. A hero who can fly is an incredible asset in a crisis. Tashinori would coach from atop a pile of junk, a stopwatch in hand. But you're no good if you get tired after 5 minutes. Higher! Faster! Izuku would soar into the sky, his wings beating against the air, the muscles in his back and shoulders screaming in protest. He would fly circuits over the beach, the weight of his own body a constant, draining force. In the beginning, he could barely stay airborne for 10 minutes before his wings would flicker and fade, depositing him unceremoniously back onto the sand, gasping for breath. But day by day, his stamina grew. 10 minutes became 20, then 30. He learned to glide on the ocean winds, conserving his energy, his movements becoming less frantic and more fluid, more graceful. Next came the aura control. His passive, calming presence was a gift, but it was also a liability. You can't walk into a tense hostage negotiation and accidentally soothe the villain into a pleasant nap, my boy, Tashinori pointed out wryly. And you can't have it active all the time, it's a constant drain on your energy. You need to learn to suppress it, to turn it on and off like a switch. This was surprisingly difficult. The aura was as natural to him as breathing. Learning to consciously rein it in felt like trying to hold his breath underwater. He would sit and meditate on the sand, focusing on drawing the light, the warmth, the very feeling of his quirk inward, containing it within himself. It took weeks of frustrating, painstaking effort, but eventually, he learned to dim his own inner light, to walk through a crowd without subconsciously easing the tension of everyone around him. And in doing so, he learned to flare it on command, to release it in a concentrated wave of tranquility that could stop a panicked cry in its tracks. Then there was the healing. Tashinori would bring small, injured animals they found, a bird with a broken wing, a stray cat with a gash on its leg. A hero saves everyone, he said gently. Not just people. Izuku would cradle the small creatures, his hands glowing with a soft, warm light. He poured his own energy, his own will to mend, into them. He learned to feel the breaks in bones, the tears in flesh, and to focus his light with pinpoint precision, knitting them back together. It was delicate, draining work. Healing a deep cut on the cat left him feeling dizzy and weak, his own wings dimming for a full hour afterward. But the sight of the bird taking flight, its wing fully healed, filled him with a satisfaction so pure and profound that it made all the exhaustion worthwhile. After the quirk training came the physical labor. The real hell. He started small, dragging bags of plastic bottles and tangled fishing nets. Soon he was moving on to tires, then furniture, then appliances. He would find a rusted refrigerator, half buried in the sand, and spend the better part of an hour trying to dislodge it. He'd wrap a thick rope around it, dig his heels into the sand, and pull. His muscles would scream, his lungs would burn, and every fiber of his being would beg him to stop. Often, he'd use his wings to help, getting a bit of vertical lift to help pull a heavy object out of a deep hole in the sand. But Tashinori quickly put a stop to that. No wings for the heavy lifting, he'd bellow. This is about your body, your muscles. Your quirk can be a tool, but it can't be a crutch. So Izuku pulled, and pushed, and lifted, using only his own raw, developing strength. He fell countless times. He scraped his knees, cut his hands on sharp metal, and collapsed into the sand in a heap of utter exhaustion more times than he could count. At the end of each morning session, he would be covered in sweat, grime, and sand, his body aching in places he didn't know he had muscles. But he never stopped. He'd look at the Herculean task before him, and he'd see the path to his dream. He'd feel the burn in his arms and legs and know it was the feeling of his body becoming a worthy vessel. He'd look at his own glowing hands, feeling the refined control he now possessed, and know his shield was growing stronger. His life outside the beach became a Spartan existence. He would go to school, his body so sore he could barely focus, his mind replaying Toshinori's coaching. He would eat the high-protein, calorie-rich diet his mentor prescribed, wolfing down food with the hunger of a boy whose body was in a constant state of rebuilding itself. He would fall into bed at night, too exhausted to even dream, and wake before the sun to do it all over again. Bakugo noticed the change, of course. He noticed the new, tightly coiled muscle in Izuku's arms and the dark circles of fatigue under his eyes. He noticed how Izuku no longer flinched when he approached, but simply met his gaze with a quiet, weary determination. It infuriated him. "What's your deal, Nightlight?" Bakugo cornered him after school one day, slamming a hand against the wall next to Izuku's head. "You've been acting weird. You think doing a few push-ups is going to get you into UA? You're still just a useless healer." Izuku didn't rise to the bait. He just looked at Bakugo, his gaze steady. "I'm training Kaken. I'm going to be a hero." There was a new weight to his words, a quiet confidence that Bakugo had never heard before. It wasn't arrogance. It was a simple statement of fact. It unnerved Bakugo more than any shouted defiance ever could. He sneered and stalked off, leaving Izuku alone with the quiet thrum of his own resolve. Month after month, the beach began to change. A small patch of clean sand appeared, then grew. The piles of trash receded slowly, painstakingly, like a tide of rust and ruin going out, and Izuku changed with it. The scrawny, soft boy was gone. In his place was a young man with a lean, wiry strength. His shoulders were broader, his arms and legs corded with hard-earned muscle. There was a new stillness about him, a centeredness born of pushing his body and spirit to their absolute breaking points and finding they wouldn't break. Finally, on the morning of the UA entrance exam, 10 months to the day after his training began, it was done. Izuku stood on the final, highest pile of trash, a broken-down truck chassis. He took a deep, shuddering breath of the clean, salt-scented air. He looked out at the beach, his beach. It was pristine. The sand was clean and golden, stretching down to meet the sparkling blue water. The sun was rising, casting its glorious light over the reclaimed coastline. He let out a scream. It wasn't a scream of pain or fear, but a raw, primal roar of triumph, of pure, unadulterated victory. He had done it. He had moved mountains. Toshinori, who had transformed into his muscle form for the occasion, stood on the newly constructed seawall, a proud, booming laugh echoing across the shore. "Excellent work, my boy! Oh my goodness! You did it!" He pulled out his phone and showed Izuku a picture. It was a photo of Izuku from 10 months ago, a scrawny, crying mess clinging to the side of a refrigerator. "Look at you then, and look at you now! You've done it! You've built yourself into a magnificent vessel." Izuku slid down from the truck, his legs trembling not from weakness, but from the sheer emotional release. He was crying, fat tears of joy and exhaustion rolling down his grimy cheeks. "All Might," he sobbed. "I did it." "Yes, you did," the hero said, his voice soft with pride. He walked over to Izuku and, with a surprising gentleness, plucked a single hair from his own golden head. "Eat this." Izuku's tears stopped. He stared at the strand of hair resting in All Might's massive palm. "Ha! To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my DNA," All Might explained matter-of-factly. "It's how it works. Now we're running out of time before the exam. No time to be picky. Eat. Eat." Izuku, his mind still reeling from the emotional high and the sheer absurdity of the situation, numbly took the hair. It felt, surprisingly normal. Just a hair. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and swallowed. It went down with a gulp, a tiny, anticlimactic act to mark the most significant moment of his life. He waited. 1 second. 2. 5. Nothing happened. I don't feel any different, he said, looking at his hands. Of course not. It takes time for your body to process it. All Might boomed. Now hurry! Get cleaned up and get to the exam hall. Your journey is just beginning. The transition was not gentle. There was no slow, dawning realization of power, no graceful awakening. It happened midway through the UA orientation, as President Mike was screaming about the rules of the practical exam. Izuku was sitting in the darkened auditorium, trying to focus, when he felt a strange, alien warmth begin to spread from his stomach. It wasn't the familiar, comforting warmth of his own Quirk. This was different. It was a hot, electric, almost violent energy, like a live wire had been dropped into his gut. It felt like a star being born inside him. The energy surged through his veins, a roaring, untamed river of power. It was immense, terrifying, far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Red bioelectric sparks, like miniature lightning bolts, danced across his skin, visible even in the dim light. He could feel the power of generations, the echoes of 8 other souls, all crying out for victory within him. It was one for all, and it was awake, and it was at war with his own Quirk. The familiar, golden light of Seraphim flared in response, not as a conscious act, but as a desperate, instinctual defense. It was his body's immune system trying to fight off an invading force. The golden light of his own radiant energy crashed against the crackling red power of OFA. The two forces met within him, a clash of sun and star, of gentle, healing light and raw, kinetic force. The feedback was agony. A silent scream was torn from Izuku's throat. A wave of searing pain erupted from his core, so intense it made him black out for a second. It felt like his very cells were being ripped apart and put back together again. He slumped in his seat, gasping, sweat beading on his forehead. The boy next to him, the serious-looking student with glasses who had tried to call him out earlier, gave him a concerned look. Are you all right? You look pale. Fine. Izuku managed to gasp, clenching his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. He had to get it under control. He had to master this. Your shield must be as mighty as the sword it will one day have to contain. All Might's words echoed in his mind. He closed his eyes, ignoring Present Mix's yelling, and focused inward. He could feel the two powers raging against each other. Orphe was a chaotic, destructive storm. Seraphim was a desperate, shining fortress, trying to hold back the tide. He realized then that All Might's training had been for this exact moment. His 10 months of aura control, of drawing his power inward, of meditating on the beach, it wasn't just for stealth. It was for this. He took a deep, shuddering breath and did what he had practiced 1,000 times. He didn't try to fight the storm of one for all. He tried to embrace it. He consciously lowered his own Quirk's defenses, not to surrender, but to guide. He visualized his golden light not as a wall, but as a riverbank, trying to channel the raging torrent of red energy. He wrapped his seraphim around Orphe, soothing it, containing it, trying to teach the raging star the gentle rhythm of the sun. Slowly, painstakingly, the internal war began to subside. The searing pain lessened, fading to a low, powerful thrum. The red sparks across his skin stopped crackling erratically and began to flow in more controlled, steady lines, intertwining with faint, pulsing veins of gold. The two powers weren't perfectly harmonized, not by a long shot. They were still two distinct, immense forces cohabiting the same space. But they were no longer trying to annihilate each other. They had reached a tense, volatile truce. Izuku opened his eyes, his entire body trembling with the strain. He felt different. He felt like a living battery, filled to the absolute brim with an unimaginable energy. He felt the serene, steady light of his own soul, and beneath it, the roaring, limitless power of 8 heroes. He was a sun and a star, crammed into the body of a 15-year-old boy, and he had no idea how to use any of it without blowing himself to smithereens. As the students were herded towards the buses that would take them to the practical exam sites, Izuku felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the kind, brown-haired girl he had saved from tripping earlier. "You looked really stressed in there," she said, her voice warm and concerned. "Are you sure you're okay? It's a lot of pressure, isn't it?" Her simple kindness was like a balm on his frayed nerves. He felt his aura flare slightly in response, a subconscious wave of calm that made her own worried expression soften. "Yeah," he managed, a small, grateful smile on his face. "Just nervous. Thanks for asking." As he boarded the bus, he looked down at his own hands. They looked the same, but they felt utterly different. One was a hand that could mend bones and soothe pain. The other was a hand that could, if he wasn't careful, level a city block. The UA entrance exam was about to begin. And for the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya was walking into a fight with a sword in his hand. He just had to figure out how to draw it without cutting himself in half. The bus ride to Battle Center B was a tense, humming affair. The air was thick with the nervous energy of 24 teenagers, each one a powder keg of ambition, anxiety, and volatile superpowers. They were the best of the best, the cream of the crop from junior highs all across the region, and they were all about to be thrown into a crucible designed to forge heroes. Izuku sat ramrod straight, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He tried to focus on the steady rhythm of his own breathing, a technique he had honed over 10 months of grueling meditation. But it was a losing battle. Beneath the surface of his carefully constructed calm, the two quirks inside him churned like a gathering storm. One for all was a low, powerful hum at the base of his spine, a sleeping leviathan of raw kinetic energy. It felt like a wild animal pacing in a cage, hungry to be unleashed. Woven around it was his own seraphim quirk, a steady, familiar golden light that was working overtime to soothe and contain the raging power. The volatile truce he'd brokered in the auditorium was holding, but it felt precarious, like a ceasefire on a battlefield where both armies were still armed to the teeth. He had a sword. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time, he was entering a contest of power with an arsenal that could compete. But a single, horrifying image kept flashing in his mind, his own limbs, torn from his body by a power he couldn't control. "Your limbs will pop right off." All Might's casual, gruesome warning was a mantra of caution. He couldn't risk it. Not here. Not now. A full-powered smash was out of the question. He had to assume that any attempt to use one for all directly, in the explosive, punch-centric way All Might did, would result in catastrophic self-destruction. He hadn't had a single second to practice with it, to even test what a 1% punch felt like. Using it now would be like trying to perform surgery with a chainsaw he'd never held before. His gaze drifted to the window, watching the cityscape blur past. A new strategy began to form in his mind, one born not of newfound power, but of long-standing habit. His entire life, he had been the boy with the useless quirk, forced to rely on his mind, on analysis, on finding a different way to solve a problem. That part of him hadn't changed. "So don't use the sword," he thought, a flicker of clarity cutting through the nervous fog. "Not yet. Lean into the shield. Lean into what you know." His plan was simple, and in a test designed to reward aggressive, destructive power, it was deeply unconventional. He wouldn't hunt for villain bots. He would hunt for opportunities to help. He would be a support unit, a spotter, a medic. He would prove that a hero's worth wasn't just measured in villains defeated, but in people saved. The bus shuddered to a halt before a pair of colossal gates set into a high concrete wall. This was it. Battle Center B. A sprawling, meticulously crafted replica of an urban environment, a concrete jungle waiting to be filled with carnage. The students filed out, gawking at the sheer scale of the foes city before them. The air crackled with anticipation. President Mick's voice blared from unseen speakers, his energy somehow even more intense than it had been in the auditorium. "Okay, listen up, little heroes. The test has begun. There's no countdown in a real fight. Run! Run! Ruin!" The massive gates began to grind open. For a second, everyone stood frozen, startled by the abrupt start. Then, a singular thought seemed to ripple through the crowd, and they surged forward, a stampede of hopefuls desperate to prove their worth. Izuku was the last one to move. He took one final, deep breath, the internal tempest of his quirk settling into a low, manageable thrum. He closed his eyes and drew on the familiar, comforting warmth in his back. His wings of light erupted from his uniform in a silent, breathtaking explosion of gold. They were magnificent, larger and more substantial than ever before, a testament to the 10 months of grueling training. Each wing was a masterpiece of shimmering, semi-tangible energy, casting a divine glow that made several of the other examinees stop and stare in awe. With a single, powerful downbeat, he launched himself into the sky, soaring over the heads of the charging crowd. From the observation room, a darkened chamber lined with monitors, a collection of UA's finest pro heroes watched the test begin. "We've got a jumper right out of the gate in Battle Center B," a voice commented. It was Snipe, the Cowba-themed hero, leaning back in his chair. Principal Nizu, a small, white-furred creature who was either a mouse, a dog, or a bear, took a sip of his tea. "Ah, yes! Izuku Midoriya. The boy with the angelic quirk, Seraphim. His application was quite unique. All rescue points on his mock exam, not a single villain point." "A pure rescue type, then," said Cementos, his blocky form unmoving. "A noble pursuit, but can he handle the pressure of combat? The exam is heavily weighted towards offensive capability. Let's see what the boy can do," said Aizawa Shoyuda, his voice a tired, unimpressed monotone. His eyes, however, hidden behind his mess of black hair, were keenly focused on the monitor displaying Izuku's flight. From his vantage point 100 feet in the air, the cityscape unfolded below Izuku like a map. The other examinees were ants, scattering into the streets and alleys, their quirks already flaring to life. He saw the glint of metal, the flash of an explosion, the telltale cloud of dust that signaled a destroyed robot. His mind, the well-oiled machine of hero analysis, kicked into high gear. He wasn't just flying, he was surveying. He was a one-man AWACS plane. "Three-pointer, corner of 3rd and Main," he called down, his voice carrying clearly in the air. A girl with chameleon-like skin, who had been running aimlessly, looked up, startled, then nodded in thanks before darting towards the location. "Group of one-pointers in the West Plaza," he shouted to another group. He became a beacon, a tactical command center in the sky. He wasn't stealing kills, he was directing his fellow examinees, optimizing their efforts, preventing them from wasting precious time searching for targets. It was a brilliant, selfless strategy, and one that earned him absolutely 0 villain points. But he could feel the subtle shift in the battlefield below. The initial chaotic frenzy was becoming a more coordinated, efficient assault. He was helping everyone. He spotted a boy with an engine quirk, the same serious student from the auditorium, streaking down a main boulevard, taking out robots with powerful kicks. He was fast, but a 2-point villain was sneaking up on him from a side alley. "To your left!" Izuku yelled. The boy, who would later be known as Tenya Ida, reacted instantly, swiveling and demolishing the ambushing robot without breaking stride. He shot a quick, appreciative glance towards the sky before speeding off again. This was his element. This was his shield in action. He wasn't fighting the battle. He was managing it, protecting the fighters, making them better. He swooped lower, his eyes scanning for examinees in trouble. He found one quickly. A boy with a gigantification quirk had taken down a 3-pointer, but in the process, the robot had fallen on him, pinning his leg under a mass of twisted metal. He was struggling, his face pale with pain. Izuku landed beside him in a whisper of golden light. "Are you okay?" "My ankle," the boy grunted, wincing. "I think it's sprained. I can't get this thing off me. Let me see." Izuku placed his hands on the massive piece of debris. He couldn't lift it with his own strength. It had to weigh over a ton. He flared his wings, using their lift to take some of the pressure off, then placed his glowing hands on the boy's ankle. A warm, soothing light poured into the injury. It wasn't an instant fix. He couldn't mend a sprain in seconds. But the boy's pained expression immediately eased as the light deadened the pain and began to accelerate the healing process. "That should help. Can you shift your leg?" With the pressure slightly lifted and the pain numbed, the boy was able to pull his leg free. "Wow, thanks, man. That's an amazing quirk. Just be careful," Izuku said, already preparing to take off again. "You should probably focus on one-pointers for now." "Right." Izuku launched back into the sky, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. That has to be worth some rescue points, he thought. He continued his patrol, a guardian angel watching over the chaotic battle. He spotted a group of 3 students cornered in a dead-end alley by a swarm of one-point robots. They were overwhelmed, their quirks not suited for dealing with multiple, fast-moving targets. He dove towards them like a golden comet. As he descended, he tucked his wings in tight, then flared them out with a sudden, explosive burst of energy. Solar flare! A blinding, non-lethal flash of pure white light erupted from his wings. It was like a camera flash magnified 1,000 times, a silent detonation of radiance. The optical sensors of the robots immediately overloaded, sending them into a state of temporary paralysis. They stumbled about, blind and disoriented, their targeting systems fried. The 3 cornered students stared, momentarily blinded themselves, before realizing their opportunity. They dispatched the disabled robots with ease. "Whoa! Thanks, Wings Guy!" one of them yelled up at him. Izuku just nodded and soared away, already looking for the next person to help. In the observation room, the mood was shifting. "He hasn't taken down a single robot himself," Snipe noted, tapping his chin. "But he's been directly responsible for at least a dozen assists. And that AoE blinding move, clever, non-lethal, effective crowd control. His medical intervention was textbook perfect." Recovery Girl chimed in from her own monitor, her voice filled with professional approval. "Stabilized the injury, numbed the pain, and allowed the other student to continue the exam. That's a high-value rescue action." Aizawa remained silent, but his eyes were narrowed in intense concentration. He wasn't just watching Izuku, he was analyzing him. The boy's tactical awareness was off the charts. His quirk usage was creative, efficient, and entirely focused on mitigating harm and maximizing the effectiveness of others. It was the mindset of a seasoned underground hero, not a first-year applicant. It was logical, but Nisa saw something more. "He's acting as a force multiplier," the principal said, a thoughtful gleam in his beady eyes. "He is elevating the performance of everyone in his battle center. It's a fascinating display of altruistic strategy. He is proving that a hero's value can be measured in the success of those he inspires and protects." The minutes ticked by. The initial frenzy of the exam was winding down. Most of the smaller robots had been destroyed. The students were getting tired, their energy reserves starting to run low. Izuku, too, was feeling the strain. Sustained flight and repeated use of his quirk were draining him. The light of his wings was still bright, but it had lost some of its initial, brilliant intensity. He knew he had accumulated a good number of rescue points, but he had a nagging fear that it wouldn't be enough. The exam was heavily biased towards raw power, and he hadn't scored a single villain point. Just as that thought crossed his mind, the ground began to tremble. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the city, growing in intensity until the very buildings seemed to shake. The students below stopped fighting, looking around in confusion and fear. From behind a skyscraper at the far end of the battle center, a monstrous shadow began to rise. It was the zero-pointer, the arena gimmick, the impassable obstacle. It was a robot of truly biblical proportions, towering over the tallest buildings in the Phos city. Its massive form was a dark silhouette against the sky, a single, glowing red eye its only feature. It was destruction incarnate, a walking catastrophe. Present Mick's voice, for once tinged with something resembling genuine warning, crackled over the speakers. "Less than 2 minutes remaining. I'd advise avoiding that big fella if I were you." The message was clear. The zero-pointer was not a target. It was a disaster to be escaped. And escape was exactly what everyone did. A tide of panicked examinees turned and fled, a desperate scramble to get away from the approaching behemoth. Izuku watched from the sky, his heart pounding. The sheer scale of it was terrifying. His light, his powers, they were nothing against something that massive. He knew he had to get away too. He was banking to turn and fly back towards the entrance when he saw her. It was the kind, brown-haired girl from before, the one who had spoken to him. She had tripped over a piece of rubble and was lying on the ground, her leg trapped beneath a large chunk of broken concrete. And she was directly in the path of the zero-pointer. The giant robot took a step, its massive foot crashing down with enough force to shatter the street. Another step, and it swung a colossal arm, smashing through the side of a building and sending a deadly rain of debris cascading towards the trapped girl. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw it all with a chilling, analytical clarity. He saw the girl's wide, terrified eyes. He saw the other students running away, their own survival their only priority. He heard the heroes in the observation room holding their breath. He saw the shadow of the falling debris about to crush her. And in that moment, the careful calculus of points, strategies, and self-preservation evaporated. His shield, his gentle quirk, his support-based tactics, they weren't enough. Not for this. This was a threat that couldn't be managed or mitigated. This was a monster that had to be stopped. This was a moment that required a sword. He didn't think. His body, as All Might had once said, just moved. He tucked his wings and dove, a golden arrow aimed at the heart of the disaster. The internal truce between his quirks shattered. The sleeping leviathan of One for All roared to life, a surge of raw, untamed power flooding his entire being. He felt the familiar, agonizing feedback as the two energies clashed, but he pushed through it, his will overriding the pain. He reached the girl just as the first wave of debris was about to hit. He didn't have time to create a proper shield. Instead, he spread his wings over her, their golden light hardening into a solid canopy, taking the brunt of the impact. Chunks of concrete shattered against the luminous barrier. He gritted his teeth, the force of the blows jarring him to the bone. "Are you okay?" he yelled over the roar of the giant robot. "My leg! It's stuck!" she cried, her voice filled with panic. The zero-pointer raised its other arm, preparing to bring it down in a final, crushing blow. They had seconds. Izuku looked at the trapped girl. He looked at the descending fist, the size of a small house. He looked down at his own hands, crackling now with an unfamiliar, terrifying red energy. He had no choice. All Might. "I have to try." He crouched, his eyes locked on the robot's massive, cyclopean head. "Power in my legs," he thought, remembering months of hauling refrigerators. "Don't channel it through my whole body, just one point." A controlled burst. A super jump. He poured a sliver of One for All into his legs. The power surged, hot and wild. It felt like strapping rockets to his feet. He pushed off the ground with a deafening crack that shattered the pavement beneath him. He shot into the air like a cannonball, a streak of gold and red, soaring directly towards the monster's face. The wind screamed past him. The robot's head grew larger and larger in his vision. He was rising to meet it, a tiny David against a metallic Goliath. But a jump wasn't an attack. He needed a weapon. Instinct took over. He reached back with his right arm, channeling the energy of his seraphim quirk. The light from his right wing bled away, coalescing and solidifying in his hand. It formed into a long, elegant blade of pure, solidified dawn. It was a weapon he had practiced forming in theory but had never dared to create, let alone use. It was his ultimate offensive ability, the Blade of Dawn. The golden sword hummed in his hand, radiating a gentle warmth. But it wasn't enough. Not for this. He grit his teeth, the pain from the warring quirks now a searing inferno inside him. Focus it, he commanded himself, his mind a pinpoint of desperate concentration. Filter it. Don't let it break me. He channeled a tiny, volatile 5% of One for All, not into his arm, but directly into the blade of light itself. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The golden blade erupted with power. The gentle hum became a high-pitched, furious scream. Crackling red energy, the signature of OFA, coiled around the blade like a serpent of lightning. The sword's light intensified, becoming so bright it was almost white-hot. It was no longer just a blade of light. It was a blade of raw, focused power, a perfect, terrifying synthesis of his two quirks. A sword made of hope, edged with the power of a star. He was level with the zero-pointer's head now. The single red eye focused on him, a tiny, defiant gnat in its path. He raised the incandescent blade high. "Smash!" he roared, the word torn from his soul, a tribute to his mentor and a declaration of his own arrival. He brought the sword down in a clean, powerful arc, slashing it directly through the robot's head. There was no clang of metal on metal. There was only the sound of sizzling energy, and a blinding flash of light. The blade passed through the thick armor plating as if it were water. It severed wires, melted circuits, and bisected the robot's central power core in a single, perfect strike. The giant red eye flickered, then died. The colossal arm, which had been moments from crushing the girl below, froze in midair. The entire gargantuan machine shuddered, its systems failing, and then it began to fall, a dead, silent mountain of steel. From the observation room, there was a stunned, collective silence. Heroes who had seen everything, who had fought world-ending threats, stared at their monitors with wide, disbelieving eyes. Aizawa was on his feet, his hands gripping the console in front of him, his usual apathy completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. Misa had dropped his teacup. Did he just? Snipe stammered. He fused them. Aizawa whispered, his voice filled with a strange, unnerving awe. He fused a light emission quirk with a strength enhancement quirk, and weaponized it. That's not supposed to be possible. In the air, Izuku felt a moment of pure, transcendent victory. He had done it. He had saved her. He had wielded the sword, and then, the cost came due. The recoil was apocalyptic. The untamed power of One for All, even filtered through his blade, ripped back up his arm. It felt like his bones were being turned to dust, his muscles shredded, his nerves set on fire. The blade of dawn dissolved back into nothingness, and his right arm was left a ruined, blackened, and horrifically broken mess. The backlash didn't stop there. The sheer output of energy required for the attack, combined with the strain of containing OFA, had completely and utterly depleted his seraphim quirk. His wings of light, his beautiful, golden shield, flickered violently, turned a translucent, ghostly white, and then vanished completely. His flight cut out. He was 200 feet in the air, with no power, a shattered arm, and nothing below him but hard concrete. He began to plummet. The world was a screaming, spinning blur of wind and sky and approaching ground. So this is it, he thought with a strange, detached calm. I saved her, but I couldn't save myself. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable, final impact. He never hit it. Suddenly, his terrifying descent slowed, his body becoming strangely light. He felt a soft, gentle slap across his cheek. He opened his eyes. The kind, brown-haired girl was there, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She had managed to free herself from the rubble and had slapped him, activating her quirk. Release! She cried, and his body became weightless, her zero-gravity quirk saving him from certain death. She carefully guided his floating form down until he was hovering just inches from the ground, then released her quirk again, letting him settle gently onto the pavement. Present Mick's voice, for once subdued, echoed across the silent battlefield. The exam is over! Izuku lay on the ground, his body a universe of pain, his consciousness fading into a gray haze. His last coherent thought was a muddled mix of gratitude and irony. He had come here to prove the value of a rescue hero, and in the end, it was a rescue hero who had saved him. An elderly woman in a hero costume, recovery girl, rushed onto the scene, her face a mixture of horror and profound fascination as she looked at his injuries. She saw the shattered bones, the burned flesh of his arm, but she also saw something else. Faint, almost imperceptible motes of golden light were already beginning to gather around the wound, a desperate, exhausted flicker of his quirk trying to knit his broken body back together. He had passed the test. He had stormed the gates of his dream. But as darkness finally claimed him, he was beginning to understand the true, agonizing price of wielding both a sword and a shield. The world swam back into focus slowly, reluctantly, like a diver ascending from a deep and murky sea. The first thing Izuku registered was the smell, a sterile, antiseptic sharpness that stung his nostrils, layered over the cloying sweetness of healing salves. The second was the sound, the gentle, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, a stark contrast to the roaring chaos that had filled his ears what felt like moments ago. The third was the light. It wasn't the harsh, fluorescent glare of a hospital, but a soft, warm, ambient glow that seemed to emanate from the room itself. He blinked, his eyelids feeling heavy as lead shutters. He was lying in a comfortable bed, and 4 drip taped to his uninjured arm. The room was a standard infirmary, clean and white, but the source of the gentle light was him. A faint, golden luminescence was pulsing from the faint wing markings on his back, visible through the thin fabric of the medical gown. His seraphim Quirk, though utterly exhausted, was still present, a pilot light of energy trying its best to mend the catastrophic damage he had inflicted upon himself. His right arm was encased in a thick, white cast from his shoulder to his fingertips. He tried to move his fingers and was met with a dull, throbbing supernova of pain that made him gasp. "Don't try to move that, dearie." The voice was kind but firm. Izuku turned his head, wincing at the pull of sore muscles. An elderly woman in a doctor's coat with a large, syringe-shaped bun in her hair was sitting in a chair beside his bed. Recovery girl. UA's legendary nurse and a pro-hero in her own right. "Your arm was a real mess," she said, her expression a mixture of grandmotherly concern and professional exasperation. "Multiple compound fractures, severe tissue damage, fourth-degree burns from some kind of energy feedback. Frankly, it looked like a firecracker had gone off inside your bones. If it weren't for your own Quirk's residual healing effect, you might have lost the arm entirely." Izuku stared at his casted limb, the memory of the zero-pointer, the incandescent blade, and the subsequent, agonizing recoil flooding back. He had done it. But the cost. "I've healed the worst of it," Recovery Girl continued, patting his good hand. "My Quirk, heal, amplifies and speeds up a person's own natural healing ability. It uses up their stamina. I've done what I can for now, but your body needs to rest and recover. You'll be sore for a week." She then leaned in, her eyes sharp and analytical. "I've never seen anything quite like it. The synergy between your body's natural healing, my Quirk, and your own light-based regeneration is fascinating. But the initial damage, that was self-inflicted, wasn't it? Some kind of catastrophic recoil." It was a question, but it felt like an accusation. Izuku could only nod, his throat too dry to speak. "A Quirk that powerful and that self-destructive, you won't last long as a hero if you keep using it like that, Sonny," she said, her tone softening. "You have a wonderful, life-giving power. Don't destroy yourself by trying to wield another one you can't control." Her words were a sobering dose of reality. He had passed the exam, yes, but he had done so by crippling himself. The sword was too heavy, its edge too sharp. If he couldn't learn to wield it without paying such a price, his dream would be a short and painful one. A week later, the acceptance letter from Yue arrived. It wasn't a letter, but a small disc-shaped projector. When he activated it, a holographic image of All Might in his muscle form exploded into the room, startling both Izuku and his mother. "I am here! Yes, a projection!" the hero boomed. Inko squealed, completely starstruck. Izuku just stared, his heart pounding. All Might went on to explain the exam's scoring system. Izuku watched, his stomach twisting into knots. He had scored 0 villain points. Absolutely none. He felt a familiar, cold dread begin to creep in. Had he failed? Had his entire strategy been for nothing? But that's not the whole story. The projection continued, a twinkle in its eye. How can a hero course reject someone who embodies the very spirit of heroism? Behold, the other half of the score, rescue points. A screen appeared behind the hologram, displaying the leaderboard. Izuku's name was at the very top. He had scored an unprecedented 70 rescue points, for directing other students, for his medical intervention, for the mass disabling of the one-pointers, and most of all, for his selfless act of saving the girl from the zero-pointer. His final score, combined with the top marks on the written exam, had not just gotten him in, it had made him the number 1 ranked applicant of the entire year. He had even surpassed Katsuki Bakugo, who had racked up an incredible 77 villain points but 0 rescue points. Izuku burst into tears, a messy, cathartic release of a week's worth of anxiety. Inko sobbed alongside him, hugging him tightly. He had done it. He was going to UA. He was finally, truly on the path to becoming a hero. The first day at UA High felt like walking into a dream. The building was immense, a modern marvel of glass and steel, a temple dedicated to the art of heroism. Finding Class 1A was an adventure in itself, its door comically oversized. He took a deep breath, the familiar thrum of his own Quirk a comforting presence, and pushed it open. The classroom was already a bubbling cauldron of barely contained chaos. He recognized some of the faces from the exam. The serious boy with glasses, Tenya Ida, was already trying to enforce classroom etiquette. And of course, there was Katsuki Bakugo, feet propped up on his desk, radiating an aura of simmering fury. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Bakugo's gaze was a mixture of disbelief and pure, undiluted rage. Izuku had beaten him. The useless, pretty nightlight had somehow come out on top, and Bakugo looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. Before any confrontation could erupt, a new voice broke the tension. "Oh, it's you! The wing guy!" Izuku turned to see the kind girl from the exam, her brown hair cut in a cute bob. She was bubbling with a cheerful energy that was infectious. "I'm Achiko Uraraka," she said, beaming. "I wanted to thank you. You saved me from that giant robot. That was amazing. That punch, no, it was a slash, right? It was incredible, and then you were just falling, and I was like, whoa, and I had to slap you to make you float. I'm so glad we're in the same class. It's nice to meet you too, Uraraka-san," Izuku stammered, his face flushing. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. And thank you for saving me. I would have been a pancake without you." Their conversation was interrupted by a voice from the floor. "If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave." A man who looked like a perpetually exhausted caterpillar was lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag. He slowly unzipped himself and stood up, revealing a tall, gaunt figure with bloodshot eyes, a mess of black hair, and a scarf that seemed to defy gravity. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." His voice was a tired monotone, completely devoid of energy. "Put these on and meet me on the training grounds." He held up a UA gym uniform. The message was clear. There would be no orientation, no welcoming ceremony. The crucible was just getting started. The locker room was a blur of introductions and nervous chatter. Izuku changed quickly, the familiar fabric of the gym uniform a stark contrast to the alien feeling of the power still thrumming beneath his skin. His arm, now free of its cast but still deeply bruised and tender, ached with a phantom pain. As they gathered on the vast training field under the bright morning sun, Aizawa's tired eyes swept over them. "We're having a Quirk apprehension test," he announced, his voice flat. A wave of murmurs went through the class. "A Quirk test on the first day? But what about orientation? UA isn't a normal school," Aizawa said, silencing them with a single, bored glare. "You've been doing these tests since middle school. Ball throw, 50-meter dash, long jump, but you were never allowed to use your quirks. Here, we push you to your limits. It's the fastest way to gauge your potential." He turned his gaze directly to Bakugo. "Bakugo, you got the highest score on the practical exam for villain points. What was your best softball throw in middle school?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo stepped up to the circle, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arms, and then with a guttural roar of "Dai!" he hurled the ball. The throw was punctuated by a massive, concussive explosion that sent a shockwave and a cloud of smoke across the field. The ball rocketed into the sky, a tiny speck against the blue. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in a chorus of woes and no ways. This was the level of UA. This was what it meant to be a hero in training. "It looks fun, huh?" Aizawa's voice was suddenly laced with a cold, menacing edge. The class fell silent. "You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points for these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately." Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the students. Expulsion? On the first day? It was insane. It was cruel. It was, as Uraraka pointed out, completely unfair. Unfair? Aizawa's lips curled into a humorless smile. Are natural disasters fair? Are villain attacks fair? Is a society that coddles you and gives you participation trophies fair? Here at UA, we push you beyond your breaking point. That's what it means to go plus ultra. He gestured to the field. Now stop whining and show me what you've got. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. Last place would be expelled. His mind raced, calculating his chances. He was strong now, and fast, but his arm was still injured, and his most powerful weapon, the one that had gotten him into this school, was a double-edged sword that would cripple him if he used it. How could he compete against students like Bakugo, or the multi-armed boy or the girl who could create objects from her skin? The tests began. The 50-meter dash was first. Izuku, unable to use his wings for a short, explosive burst without risking them as a crutch, ran it normally. His time was decent, a testament to his 10 months of physical conditioning, but it was nothing spectacular. He watched Ida, with the engines in his legs, clear the distance in just over 3 seconds. The grip strength test was next. He squeezed the device with his left hand, his right arm still too tender to use. Again, his score was average. He watched the massive, multi-armed student, Mizo Shoji, crush the device with a score that was off the charts. Standing long jump, side-to-side steps, test after test, he was landing squarely in the middle of the pack, sometimes slightly below. He was using the physical strength he had built, but he wasn't using his quirks. He was afraid to. His wings felt like they would be inefficient for these short, explosive tests, and one for all was a nuclear option he couldn't risk. He could feel Aizawa's eyes on him. The teacher's gaze was sharp, analytical, and utterly unimpressed. He saw a student who wasn't using his full potential, a student who was holding back, and Aizawa hated nothing more than wasted potential. Finally, it was Izuku's turn for the ball throw. This was it. This was the test that required a single, massive burst of power. A test that was tailor-made for a smash. His classmates watched him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and pity. He was the top-ranked student from the exam, the one with the spectacular light wings, but so far, he had been completely unremarkable. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy and alien in his left hand. He couldn't use his right. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm within him. He could try to channel a tiny fraction of OFA into his left arm, just 1%. But the risk, what if he miscalculated? What if even 1% was too much and his other arm ended up in a cast? I have to try something, he thought desperately. He wound up, focusing, trying to pull a tiny sliver of that immense, crackling power into his fingertips. He could feel it surging, hot and uncontrollable. Fear seized him. He threw the ball, but at the last second, he instinctively pulled back, releasing the power. The ball flew with a pathetic arc, landing just a few dozen feet away with a soft thud. 46 meters. The silence on the field was deafening. Izuku stared at his score, a cold wave of shame washing over him. 46 meters. It was worse than his middle school record. I was wondering when you were going to show your true colors. Aizawa's voice was a low, dangerous drawl. He hadn't moved from his spot, but the air around him had grown heavy. His black hair was floating, and his eyes were glowing with a terrifying, ruby-red light. His scarf whipped around him as if it had a life of its own. He had activated his quirk. Erasure. Midoriya Izuku, your performance has been the most disappointing of all. Izuku felt a sudden, strange emptiness. The low hum of his two quirks, the constant companion of the last week, was gone. He felt normal. Powerless. It was a terrifying, disorienting sensation. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his voice cold as ice. He took a step forward, the bindings of his scarf writhing like snakes. A flashy performance in the entrance exam, a spectacular, self-destructive move that got you noticed. And now? You're holding back. Are you planning to cripple yourself again and expect someone else to save you every time you decide to get serious? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking right at the heart of Izuku's fears. You can't be a hero with that kind of thinking, Aizawa continued, his red eyes boring into Izuku's soul. You'd be a liability on the battlefield. A one-trick pony whose one trick kills himself. You'd be useless, useless. The word echoed in the chambers of his memory, spoken in Bakugo's sneering tone, in the laughter of his classmates, in the tired realism of All Might on the rooftop. He had come so far, only to be told the same thing all over again. Aizawa blinked. His hair fell, and his eyes returned to normal. The comforting, terrifying hum of Izuku's quirks rushed back in, a dizzying flood of power. I've returned your quirk, the teacher said, his tone still hard. You have one more chance with the ball throw. Don't make me regret letting you into my class. Izuku stood in the circle, his entire body trembling. He was at a crossroads. He could play it safe, use his wings to try and add a bit of lift to his throw, get a mediocre score, and pray it was enough to avoid last place. Or he could risk it all. He could try to tame the storm. He looked at his bruised right arm, then at his healthy left. He thought of Recovery Girl's warning, of Aizawa's scathing critique. They were both right. His current method was unsustainable. A full power smash wasn't an option. But what if he didn't use it like a smash? An idea began to form, a desperate, brilliant spark of inspiration born from Aizawa's own words. One-trick pony. He couldn't just be a sword. He couldn't just be a shield. He had to be both. He had to find a way to make them work together. He remembered the feeling of channeling OFA into his Blade of Dawn. The blade had acted as a conduit, a filter, focusing the raw, chaotic power into a controlled, directional attack. His Seraphim Quirk had shaped the destructive energy of One for All. He took the ball in his left hand again. He closed his eyes, shutting out the stares of his classmates, the impatient glare of his teacher. He focused inward, not on the raging power of Ofe, but on the steady, familiar light of Seraphim. He took a deep breath. Don't channel it into my arm. Channel it into my quirk. He began his wind-up, a slow, deliberate motion. He drew on a tiny sliver of One for All, just 1%, from the core of his being. He didn't let it touch his muscles or his bones. Instead, he fed the crackling red energy directly into the golden light of his own quirk, which he was gathering in his palm. The two powers met, not with a violent clash, but with a controlled fusion. The gentle, radiant energy of Seraphim enveloped the raw, kinetic energy of OFA, acting as a buffer, a lens, a focusing array. The softball in his hand began to glow, first with a soft gold, then with a furious, pulsating light, shot through with veins of red lightning. It felt like holding a miniature sun. He saw it in his mind's eye, not a punch, not a smash, but a release. A controlled detonation. He threw. At the exact moment he released the ball, he released the combined energy. The result was not a physical explosion like Bakugo's. It was a concussive, directed blast of pure energy. A sound like a sonic boom, a sharp, clean bang, ripped through the air. The ball didn't just fly, it was propelled. It shot from his hand like a cannonball, leaving a shimmering, golden trail in its wake, like the tail of a comet. The recoil wasn't a shattering of bone, but a wave of force that pushed him back a step, leaving his arm tingling and numb, but completely intact. No pain. No broken bones. The entire class stared in stunned silence, their jaws hanging open. Bakugo's eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and something that looked terrifyingly like comprehension. Uraraka gasped. Ida pushed his glasses up his nose, his analytical mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Izuku stood there, panting, his left hand glowing with a residual golden light. He looked at his arm, then flexed his fingers. They worked. Nothing was broken. A wide, incredulous grin spread across his face. He had done it. He had found the key. Seraphim wasn't just a shield, it was a conduit. It was the control rod for his own personal nuclear reactor. Aizawa watched the ball sail through the air, his face completely unreadable. The device in his hand beeped, a long, sustained note. He looked down at the screen. He held it up for the class to see. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo by 1/10 of a meter. The teacher's lips curled into the faintest, almost imperceptible hint of a smile. It was a terrifying sight. Not bad, Aizawa said, his voice a low monotone that somehow carried more weight than a shout of praise. You've finally started thinking. The rest of the tests were a blur for Izuku. He was still riding the euphoric high of his breakthrough. He used his new technique sparingly, infusing small bursts of controlled, light-channeled energy to give himself an edge. A small blast from his feet to add distance to his long jump. A concussive pulse from his hands to help in the sit-ups. He was learning, adapting, evolving with every passing minute. His wings, too, found their place. For the distance run, he used them not to fly, but to create a low-pressure zone behind him, reducing wind resistance. A subtle but effective use of aerodynamics that allowed him to maintain a punishing pace without tiring as quickly. He was no longer in the middle of the pack. He was competing. He was a contender. When the final results were posted, he stood in 5th place. A respectable, powerful showing. He looked down the list and his heart sank when he saw the name in last place. Toru Hagakure, the invisible girl. She was on the verge of tears. And I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, a wicked, sadistic grin spreading across his face. It was a logical deception to make you push yourselves to your limits. The class erupted in outrage, while a girl with a black ponytail, Momo Yayorozu, calmly explained that, of course, it was a lie, and they should have all realized it. As the students headed back to the locker room, exhausted and emotionally drained, a sense of camaraderie was already beginning to form. They had survived their first day. They had been tested and not found wanting. Izuku felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Ida. Midoriya-kun, he said, bowing stiffly. I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation. I misjudged you. Your control over your quirk and your strategic thinking are truly exemplary. You are a far more formidable student than I initially perceived. Oh, thank you, Ida-kun, Izuku stammered, overwhelmed by the formal praise. Uraraka bounced over to them. Deku-kun, that was so cool! She exclaimed, using the nickname she had overheard Bakugo snarling earlier, though she imbued it with a cheerful, encouraging energy. That throw! It was like whoosh and then kabang. Izuku found himself smiling, a real, genuine smile. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by peers who weren't mocking his quirk or his ambition. They were impressed. They were his classmates. Maybe, he thought, they could even be his friends. But as he walked, he felt a burning gaze on the back of his neck. He turned to see Bakugo standing a few feet away, his fists clenched, his expression a thunderous mask of fury. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Izuku knew that his breakthrough hadn't just earned him respect, it had ignited a rivalry that would burn hotter and more dangerous than any explosion. He had found a way to wield the sword, and in doing so, he had painted a target on his back. The life of a hero, he was quickly learning, was a constant apprehension of his own power, of the expectations of others, and of the challenges that still lay ahead.